Bo taredi, kia ora koutou katoa, ka anu I te mihi, kia koutou e mātakitaki ana e whakarongo ana I tēnei wā. I want to make a video now. It's kind of a follow-up video, not directly or not, certainly not with much any planning whatsoever. But over a year ago, I made a video which was about, at that time, I'd been an expat for a year, and I made a video about that experience and my observations and perspectives based on what at that time had been just over a year, I think, as an expat living here in East Timor. And I remember deliberately avoiding travel, just basic travel stuff like what it's like, weather, food, all of that, because there's lots out there. And so if I remember rightly, I focused on the experience of learning new culture and language and adjusting to a new place. And I'm following that up over a year later. I've now been here more than 2.5 years, and I'm following that up with this video. And my main topic about this is something I've been reflecting on, thinking about quite a bit just recently, is the effects of being an expat. The effects of being an expat, I'd say sort of mid to long term. Now, I have 2.5 years is not, it's all relative, right? I mean, how long is a piece of string? It's not a long time, certainly in comparison to some people who have lived many years as expats in different countries and places. But then, of course, there are some people who have only had little stints of a few months or a year or so at a time. So the point is not to really measure the length of how long one has been an expat, but yeah, the thrust of my thinking at the moment to reflect in this video is what I consider to be, maybe sounding a bit ominous, sort of pitfalls, and my realization after 2.5 years of what an expat community really kind of is, or how it's made up, and reflecting on my role in that and what's led me to be a part of this, and just seeing the forest for the trees, you know what I mean? Like, is it the trees for the forest? The forest for the trees, and stepping outside and making some observations. So one of them is, and I've known this for some time, the expat community is made up of characters, should we say. It takes what I mean is this: it takes an unusual person somewhat to go and live in a completely foreign environment. Don't forget, an expat is very different to a tourist who goes and visits a new place and enjoys what it has to offer, usually for a holiday, to enjoy the culture, the food, the weather, if it's a tropical warm place, and and they get to experience something of the culture, and then they go home to their normal lives. Right, they're typically regular people, of sorts, and but an expat is someone who is usually chosen. I mean, sometimes they're posted. If they're especially like military people, might have to go and spend extended periods of time in strange places because it's their job, and they just follow the instruction. But for the large part, expats have put themselves in positions to go and live in foreign environments, and I've worked out that takes an unusual type of person, because a typical person from their home place doesn't do this. They don't. I mean, they just simply don't. It's that simple. So anyway, my point is that expats are, often eccentric in some way. They're eccentric because it takes an eccentric person to handle the challenges that being an expat can present. And don't get me wrong, that's not a criticism, that's not a judgment. It's just what I consider my perspective to be like a fact. You don't find a lot of what you would call straight up regular Joes in the expat community. That makes the expat community very interesting. Now, I was just reflecting on this with Ajing this morning, chatting about it. In our home communities in Western countries, or wherever we expats are from, of course we have eccentric, unusual people too, who have got like quirks and maybe unusual hobbies or characteristics, personalities, pursuits. We have those people are everywhere. We come from those places, so of course we are part of that too. But what I have sort of come to the realization is that in our regular home environment, eccentric people are a minority spread amongst the regular people with regular pursuits and regular lifestyles. But when you extract those eccentric, slightly unusual people from those normal communities and put them all together in one place, in my case Dili, East Timor, but all around the world no doubt, they make up this new community that we call expat communities, right? And you've got I'm exaggerating to make the point. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not like all the expat people are straight up weird. I'm not trying to say, although some are, but certainly a bit different. And you put them all together and they make a new community. So you've suddenly got this higher concentration of eccentricity, and that becomes the new norm because that's the community, right? And that community, some members of that community only interact with other members of the community. Some branch out and make local friends, and it's varied. But yeah, it takes a strange-ish person to become an expat, and then you put them all together and they become a community, and by default, I mean, they can't be any other way. It's quite an unusual community, but in that environment, they are the expats, and it becomes a norm. And the pitfall that I can imagine, and I can only imagine because I haven't been an expat for decades or anything like that to really have I don't have enough in the rear view mirror to look back on a whole bunch of time, but the pitfall and risk that I'm feeling at the moment is that at worst you could lose touch with kind of reality. Like, you've created a new reality, and that's your new norm, and that's fine. I mean, people should live how they want to live and where they want to live. It's all good. But the feeling I'm thinking about at the moment is that if it was to extend for myself, I can only use myself as an example. If I stayed in this type of lifestyle for 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years, I could quite easily lose touch with what it's like to be where I'm from, to be a Māori person from New Zealand. I would lose experience of that. It would get further and further in the rear view mirror. And then I'm also interacting with my new community, which, regardless of how little or how much you interact with the expat community, you're part of it and you can't avoid it. And and not that you should try to avoid it, but just you're part of this new community. And I think you could, at worst, just lose touch, and depending on which country you're in at that time, and the situation and circumstances of that location, economically, culturally, work-wise, career, pastimes, even geographical environment stuff, you could just end up in a whole different world that becomes so entrenched in you and you in it that the idea of going back to where you're from could be quite alien. You could have I imagine you could have a big reverse culture shock, not just culturally on the surface of language, people, lifestyle, place, but even of going back to be amongst regular people. Again, I'm surmising some of these things, imagining some of these things, but experiencing enough of the beginning of it to have these thoughts. So yeah, being an expat is amazing. Don't get me wrong. You meet amazing people, local and fellow expat alike. You have great experiences. This is how you experience the world, or one of the ways you can experience the world. So I wouldn't trade it for anything. But I can foresee this pitfall looming. Not that I fear it, but I'm aware. And I think it's healthy. This is kind of the next step, I guess. Once you realize something, is the next step for me is to spend some time, like, back in my home environment. For me, it's New Zealand. For anyone else, it's wherever else. Going back and spending time, if only to reset, regroup, kind of like just push the reset button and remember who I am and where I'm from. And then move forward and go and jump in another weird situation. But yeah, that's my reflection for this video. I'm really curious what fellow expats, short, mid or long term, might think. I'm not. I don't want this video to come across as a doom and gloom or a scary thing or a judgmental thing. Even it's more just an observation and a feeling, and maybe I've come to this position in my thinking because for this experience of being here in Timor-Leste, East Timor, it's coming. I can see the end of the tunnel, the light at the end of the tunnel, because we are leaving here in December. What is that? 4 months away from now. So maybe it sharpens the experience that I'm having and have had to start thinking of, what does it mean? I mean, it's early days. I'll probably be reflecting on it for a while. But yeah, that's part of being an expat. And I don't read or hear people talking about expatism, a new word maybe, in this light. Mostly people will talk about, the things they'll talk about the challenges, and I've talked about them myself. They'll talk about the joys, they'll talk about the pleasures, and you'll see thousands of videos on YouTube about travel log style, this is being an expat in China or being an expat in Africa or Mozambique or wherever. There's lots of that, but I'm curious about the discussion on long-term effects of expatism, expat life, and positives, negatives, and otherwise. Yeah. So that's the kōrero for today. If you find that of any interest and want to comment, please do. And let's see where it may lead. Ka kite.